So I'm going to move us on to our next presenter. Next up is Ingrid Frandji, and she's been very gracious about how I pronounce her name. I'm one of those people who doesn't have another language other than English and, well, Koine Greek, but that's no use to anybody in the real world. So I want to thank everyone who's doing these things in another language and doing this in English for us. Thank you so much. So Ingrid is a state lecturer at the State University of Paraná. Her PhD is from the Federal University of Paraná and was a thesis on female agency, family, and emotions in Roman Egypt. She leads a research project on receptions of antiquity in the 21st century and has combined that interest with her passion for heavy metal, both as a fan and a researcher, to bring us this paper today, which is entitled Historical Consciousness and the Reception of Classical Antiquity in Heavy Metal. Also, she would like to see pictures of your dogs.
Hello, everyone. Just 1 second. I will share my... Can you see my presentation and can you hear me?
Can hear you, can see it. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm just starting the timer for you.
Okay. I would like to start by thanking the event organizers for accepting this presentation and also for organizing such an important event for different fields of studies and all of these online. Being from the Global South myself, I do believe it's important to listen and also to be heard regarding our own experience and our own researches. For my presentation today, called Historical Consciousness and the Reception of Classical Antiquity in Heavy Metal, I intend to first show the way which led me to the questions discussed here today. Later, I will present the concept of historical consciousness developed by German scholar Jorn Rüsen. Then, I will analyze some songs that deal with classical antiquity and can, to a certain extent, be understood based on the dimensions presented by Rüsen. This is a heavily theoretical presentation, and I'm doing this because I am an historian myself, and teaching history is a political instance. Here in Brazil, we have lots of discussions about it, and I do believe I need to talk more about it. So let me just... In July 2023, during the National History Symposium promoted by the Brazilian National Association of History, after presenting the results of my research project entitled The Reception of Antiquity in Contemporary Times, one question caught my attention. What leads a young person in Brazil to study history and, in particular, to be interested in the ancient world? Many of the present, especially the undergrads, say that they had a previous interest in history because of different contemporary media, such as films, music, comics, and series. In this sense, they decided to study history at a higher education level because they had an interest and a perception of what history is based from these cultural products. Evidently, this perception is mostly modified with higher education. But I realized that there is, yes, in one way, a motivation in the way they see history and the way that history is produced in these contemporary media. However, not everyone interested in history will study history at a higher education level or an academic or professional level. So to what extent does interest in these media mobilize a specific perception about the past? With this question in mind, I went back to the writings of Jorn Rüsen, a German historian, to think about how people learn history, how it can be related to a perspective on life, and on the passage of time. For Rüsen, unlike what happens with science or math, learning history is an organic process. For example, a child understands the difference when he sees a photo of himself or herself as a baby. He can see this is not me anymore because time has passed. Before being an academic subject, history produces meaning in human life. Life in itself deals with this passage of time. For Rüsen, historical consciousness is a structure of human thought. relating collective and personal identity, memory, and action. This means that more than a specific intellectual apparatus like formal education, historical consciousness would be innate to human beings. So everyone, for reason, everyone has a historical consciousness. This past, however, is mobilized in different ways. For reason, historical consciousness can be defined as a category that relates to every form of historical thought, to which subjects have the experience of the past and interpret it as history. In other words, this reason, it is the sum of the mental operations with which man interpreted the experience of the temporal evolution of their world and themselves in such a way that can intentionally guide your practical life over time. The following scheme represents Reason's idea, which defines that who we believe we are now depends on who we believe we were. Therefore, according to Fernando Serri, one of the authors I have used, historical consciousness is not defined here as a particular achievement, but as an elementary and general cultural acquisition in which subjects make the synthesis between objective and subjective, empirical and normative. From this perspective, Rüsen understands the structures of meaning generation as it follows here. Here we can see these four different types of what he calls historical consciousness: traditional, exemplary, critical, and genetical. Traditional is much more linked to this collectivity and some kind of passivity, while the genetic emphasizes becoming and the subject's action and focus mostly on the subject. In the middle, we have these two categories: the exemplary, which is closer to the traditional, and the critical, which is closer to the genetic. All of this is mobilized by what Rüsen defines as historical culture, the set of historical cultural phenomena representative of the relationship with temporality. This includes the construction of public memory, the history our children learn at school, especially with different curricula, such as the Common Core, which we have now in Brazil, and in particular, cultural products. Rüsen even wrote in one of his books about how he thinks cultural products gave more historical meaning than other things. And not only cultural products that deal with the past, and for what interests me here, especially about the ancient past. I borrowed this idea of historical culture to understand the following question. Is it possible to think whether different albums or music that deal with classical antiquity mobilize a specific type of historical consciousness? To this end, I made a small selection of albums that, considering their visual and musical presentation, for here, especially the lyrics, can be indicative of specific types of historical consciousness. This does not mean that those who listen to these albums will produce the type of historical consciousness that I'm saying here. However, I find it relevant to try to understand music from two perspectives. First, being the cultural products of their own context of production, they can indicate how classical antiquity is understood nowadays. Furthermore, they can produce a type of subjectivity in their listeners, which is not the focus of analysis here, since this would require another type of research, but these will relate with the ancient past in specific ways. This has a lot to do with the whole theoretical framing of the reception studies. I do not intend here to produce a detailed analysis of the album's motivations or represent which sources, ancient or modern, based their production. I'm more interested in understanding how the narrative produced by these albums can mobilize, at some level, the typology of historical consciousness from Rüsen. This is the first album that I have chosen, which is well known for everyone, I think. The Italian band narrates the life of Emperor Caligula from different types of sources, even if they are mostly modern. Even though it deals with a theme considered traditional in academia, it is clear that the narrative produced by the band understands the spirit as something somewhat bloodthirsty in Roman history. But still, I understand the many of the songs indicate what Rüsen defines as a traditional historical consciousness. And here I have chosen two examples. Here we have these qualities, Roman qualities, which are seen as really important. And why are they here, if not as some kind of seen in the past as something that needs to continue in some way or another? And also, I will not read it because I don't believe I will have all this time. And here, this for me is especially is really important, since we hear not only there are those Romans from the past, those men who died for honor and so on, and where are they now? What is happening today now? Where are these people now? I think this shows a lot about the traditional view of history. In the two examples, it's possible to see the logic of the values from the Roman society as something positive and reinforced. For reason, and I'm sitting here again, traditions become visible and will be accepted and reconstructed as stabilizing guidelines for practical life itself. It can be seen that the individual who understands his world through historical consciousness of the traditional type intends, through his speech, to bring the past to the present, without problematizing the current conjectures in which he is immersed. That can be seen in the albums, but also in the speeches of the band's lead singer. Here I have highlighted some of the most important parts, which I think need some attention. It is also it's also important to highlight the position of the vocalist who understands himself as a heir to the Roman tradition, the Italian tradition, with the band being a way of highlighting these attributes of the ancient Roman civilization. In different interviews, the vocalist defends the idea of Romans' permanence in contemporary society. And here, I do believe we can see it when he says that Rome is still with us, that the US is the new Rome, which is something really huge to say. And this talk about identity. Identity is the basis of what builds in one way or another our own historical consciousness for reason. So I do believe we have here a traditional view of historical consciousness. The emphasis on an European or Italian identity seems goes with what appears in the South. The use of Caligula, Roman emperor, considered controversial and also widely used in contemporary media, symbolizes both a violent past, but one that maintains similarities with contemporary times. In the album, Roman's battles and values are highlighted, even if they came from older sources that are not necessarily ancient. This can be understood as a form of transposing a notion about the Roman past into our own century. In a similar way, it's possible to observe the same characteristics of this traditional vision in these albums, Sic Transit Gloria Mundi, of this band. I'm sorry, I don't know how to speak this band, but it's okay. And here we can say not only the whole idea of what was forgotten in the past, and it's not between us anymore, and at the same time, the values and virtues of Roman society, again, being reinforced. Evidently, most albums dealing with the ancient past can be understood within Rüsen's traditional typology. That is, as some type of media that evoke a perception of values to be replicated in contemporary times. Understanding the past as something that can be directly transposed nowadays. What is curious, actually, is how a large part of these productions are, in fact, influenced by other types of media, especially movies, creating a multi-temporal relationships in terms of the reception of the Roman past. And Rüsen's second typology, the exemplary type, the individual intends to explain his world through examples from the past, references about situations he has experienced, not trying to insert the past into the present, but explain the present through the past. Here I have two examples. First of all is the song about from the band Holy Martha from the album Civil War. And here we have also a whole discussion about what was Europe and what is Europe nowadays. I think this is the huge point here. In the view of these contemporary discussions, I know the album is kind of 15 years ago, a little bit more, but especially regarding what is the European Union, what does it mean, the position of a mythical Europe itself must be taken into account, and this is, from my position, what we see here. This is also evident in here in the band Atlas. The idea of something speaking an ancient tongue that can be understood nowadays, to me, make this connection about this past that is exemplary and that is here, and that can explain why we are here today. The examples can mobilize a so-called exemplary historical consciousness, since they seek to justify, in some extent, how the past can explain the present. If there is an Europe in the past, but that is divided into great empires, how are these represented in contemporary times through different political and economical agreements? It seems clear to me that both bands are also trying to provide certain nationalistic tones to their concerns, which fits not only with the traditional typology mentioned previously, as well with the very idea that the past is an example that must, to some extent, explain the present. Rüsen's third typology is called critical and consists of a narrative that questions the traditional base for producing knowledge about the past. Within this perspective, we can mainly include albums that question an hegemonic vision of the ancient past, and in particular, the centrality of Greco-Roman culture. As seen in previous topics, the Greco-Roman past is often evoked as a form of legitimization of discourse about cultural and national identities. In that regard, I understand that the album by the band Uwe allows an apprehension of both meanings, critical and genetic. And here, I know Uwe is not metal anymore. It's been a while, but I do believe lots of people who were into early Uwe are still listening to them. I am one of them. And it has these, people know a lot about it, people who like metal. This is why it's here. With the critical view, the individual denies some of these values ratified by the society in a process that happens when he perceives himself inserted in a present linked to the past, but which in turn no longer dictate orders, as structures are constantly changing. And trying to insert the past or legitimize the present only through its examples would not be possible. This is my take from this song, which is Rolling Stone, from this album, The Assassination of Julius Caesar from 2017. We have here not only this not necessarily positive view of the past, but also this negation in some way. Here it's a negation of Christianity, which is kind of leitmotif into heavy metal, but in some extent it also negates, in a way, this Roman past. And just almost ending, we have the genetic type of historical consciousness that occurs when the individual is fully conscious of your present, and that you are inserted in a world where your present is a partial reflection of what happened in the past, in such a way that what happened will not happen again, but that some continuities remain, so that in this process of awareness, the individual does not totally deny the past, but he does not try to insert or legitimize the present through it, like what we have seen with the exemplary or the traditional type. The genetic historical consciousness establishes a synthesis between these two. So it's not a critique, but it's understanding how things are still here. And I have chosen this song, which is Nemoralia, the first song from this album. This is the last part of the song. And here, to me, we can see this huge example of this almost a joke between what we had as Diana, the goddess, Diana, the princess, how Diana, the goddess of the hunt, and the princess being hunted, and how the flowers in her head are the ancient gods of the moon. So we have this relation that, yes, Diana, the goddess, is a cultural symbol for us, but it has different meanings now and can be understood in this synthesis between two. I do believe Uva's album can cover both of these aspects, since it, on the one hand, criticizes aspects of the Roman past, as it can be seen in the first song. At the same time, it evokes the ancient past in the figure of Diana, goddess and princess, translating what Rüsen understands as this genetic understanding. Here are my final remarks and what I have learned from all of these, or what I'm trying to learn from all of this. Most of heavy metal bands have this traditional view of history, not only on its themes, for example, talking about emperors and war and so on, but also how they understand what the past was and what it means for us nowadays. So the past is seen quasi as something virtuous and glorious that must be brought together. This has a lot to do with nationalist identities, but also, to my stand, it has a lot to do with masculinities. I have not talked about it here. I didn't have the time, but I do believe there is a sense of masculinity in all of this. At the same time, I am also aware of this countercultural meaning of heavy metal and what does it mean to understand this Roman past as something who have these important characteristics for style, which is violence, blood, and so on. The reception of antiquity can mean different things to those who produce, as I have showed with this interview with Exil Proclus, but also it can be different for those who listen to the music. And I'm thinking here, what does someone, for example, here in Brazil, understand what is this ancient culture based on what they are listening? And here for the future prospects and analysis on how metalheads can understand antiquity, but not only that, thinking about these gendered differences, race difference, local difference, and so on. This paper here, this presentation here, to me is really important because in Brazil, as I have said before, we have a huge discussion and we have less, we mostly don't have history classes anymore in high school, for example. And so to show what is important, how it's important, not only for what we are doing here, but also in a huge sense about history is important for us. We need to study it all. Here are some of my references. Well, I have put this in how we do it here in Brazil, which is the Brazilian Norm Association. And these are my dogs. As I have said, I really, really like seeing people talk. Thank you all so much.